Hi, I'm Eric Pahls. I'm from Beloit, Kansas, and I'm majoring in journalism. I was an intern for Morning Joe, which is a 3-hour live morning political show on MSNBC. It's hosted by Joe Scarborough, who's a former Republican congressman from Florida, and Mika Brzezinski, who's a journalist, a Democrat, the son of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is a former national security advisor to Jimmy Carter. And I guess the purpose of the show is to kind of start a conversation on political issues with the people that matter. So it's not just kind of looking from a distance, it's actually talking with the people. Like I said, it was a 3-hour live show, so it was like an adrenaline rush for 3 hours every morning. We also helped with the show right before that, which is called Way Too Early, and it's hosted by Thomas Roberts. It comes on at 5:30 in New York. And so really from 5:30 to 9, we were sprinting all over 30 Rockefeller Center, greeting guests, making sure things were in place for the show, making sure everybody had what they needed, making sure the control room had everything that they needed on the desk for the hosts and for the guests. So it was draining but exciting. Starting from when I was like 14, 15 years old, I have used Twitter as kind of like people use LinkedIn. And so I think it was last February or April, I tweeted or maybe it was March. Beginning of 2013, I tweeted Joe Scarborough, the host, and just asked, do you guys have any internships specific to your show? I really love Morning Joe, but the other shows on MSNBC I wouldn't be as interested in. And he replied that day with, oh, sure, yeah, we do. I'll have somebody email you. And I got an email and went through the normal application process, but I think it helped that I had reached out to Joe. And they called me, and I did a phone interview for a while, and the phone interview essentially ended with saying, oh, by the way, you're going to need to be here at 3:30 every morning, and do you think you can do that? And I imagine, some people might have hesitated on that part, or some people, but as much as I loved the show and as much as I wanted that internship, I immediately said yes. And I think that had a lot to do with why I ended up getting chosen for the internship, because I was willing to come in at that time. I even think I might have mentioned to her that, I don't mind if I have to be the coffee intern or cleaning the floor with a Q-tip. I just, would be happy to be there. So I think it's important to, don't be crazy and too eager, but I think it's important to show that you're willing to work and that you are willing to make the sacrifices necessary to have an incredible experience like that. Well, at MSNBC, Morning Joe is kind of separated from a lot of the network, and that's not just ideologically, that's just because of time and schedule, and they kind of have their own crew. So they do it a little bit differently than the rest of MSNBC, which is part of NBC. They have a really formal kind of pool process where you put your name in and then you go through a series of steps. But I think part because Morning Joe is separate, and part because I kind of went directly to Joe originally. Mine was a little bit shorter, I think. I went ahead, and when I got the first email, I sent them my resume, and then they asked for an interview, and I did that interview, and essentially they said, you'll hear back in a couple weeks. We might have more questions for you. I heard back the next day asking if I had any ideas where I would live in New York, which at that point I was feeling pretty confident about it. And then I think it was April 11th or sometime mid-April, I got an email, just very kind of informal email saying, hey, we'd love to have you on the Morning Joe team. Are you still interested? And of course, I was very interested. I was home for some reason, and I just remember sprinting through my house in Beloit, pretty excited about that. But yeah, it was kind of an informal process, but I find that unless you have something that just absolutely stands out, or unless you have the perfect resume, I find that it's kind of better to use those connections or use a different avenue than everybody else, because not only does that separate you a little bit from everybody else, but that kind of puts you top of mind. It maybe makes it a little more conversational so they can get to know you through the application process rather than just a name and a resume. I would get there at 3:30, and I always say the first half hour is like your stereotypical intern stuff, which is, make sure the coffee's there, make sure, any clothes that need to be laid out or prepared are done, make sure everybody's information, their research is done, their prep is in front of them and ready for them when they get there. And then the rest of the time, like I said, we had Way Too Early with Thomas Roberts that came on at 5:30, and we'd help to make sure his show ran smoothly. And then guests and panelists would start coming from Morning Joe, and we'd make sure they were all settled and make sure it was definitely a practice in communication, because the entire time, say I'm with Howard Dean or I'm with Michael Steele, the former RNC director, I need to be talking to my supervisor the whole time saying, hey, they're over here, hey, we're over here now, hey, we're over here, hey, they need this, they need that. So if I'm in the studio, making sure that I'm communicating with the other interns that are with the guests to make sure, their hit time is at 7:20, they need to be, in the studio and ready at 7:15, stuff like that. So once that initial preparation and the coffees and all that stuff, which is not bad, once that was over, it became a mad scramble, and it was kind of, there were some mornings where in that 3 hours we'd have 14 or 15 guests. And it became a little bit like that game Rush Hour. I don't know if you ever played that game where you have to like move all the cars and the red car has to get out. It kind of became like that because we had 3 green rooms, and sometimes you have like 6 guests there. And well, this guest can't be with this guest in the green room, but all this kind of stuff. So you'd be shuffling people all over the place, and it also became a practice in different personalities working together. But I gotta say, virtually everybody we worked with was very pleasant to work with. This internship was valuable for a couple of reasons. It was valuable, first and foremost, like any internship is, for networking. You meet people, and not only do they become, good people to know and good people to get advice from, or good people to get hired by and all that kind of stuff, but good people to get advice from. A lot of the people that I talked to that were on the show this summer really helped me kind of figure out whether or not straight journalism or more political communications was kind of where I wanted to go. And ultimately, this internship helped me decide that maybe political communications is the right way to go. And not because this was a terrible journalistic experience that ruined it for me, but because I got to work with a lot of politicians and a lot of campaigners and that kind of stuff along the way. And I realized that that was kind of speaking to me a little bit more. So where do I go from here? I'm starting to look at consulting firms this summer, political consulting firms. I helped on a campaign the last several weeks, moving into November. I just kind of starting that process now that election day is over. So I'm not quite sure, but I will say the experiences and working with the people in that field and the connections that I made on Morning Joe are going to be huge in deciding where I go with my next internship and career. I did not afford to live in New York City. I did get some help from my parents, but New York City is incredibly expensive, and I've always told people when they look at internships to never be ready for an internship like New York or Washington, D.C. or abroad or anywhere and think that you're going to make any money off of it or think it's necessarily a short-term good financial decision. But the whole purpose to me of internships is, especially on ones that cost this much money, if it's this big of a internship, I suppose you could say. For me, the whole purpose of an internship like this is it's an investment. So though I can be pretty stingy with money, this was an investment, I think, in my future career, and hopefully this internship will actually help me be in a position where I can even make more money in the future. So though New York was incredibly expensive, and even finding the cheapest places to live, it was absolutely worth it, in the sense that I, like I mentioned earlier, have connections now in New York City in politics and experiences that I will absolutely never forget.